Welcome back. He earned his doctorate in history from American University with the focus of studying white supremacist organizations, neo-Nazism, and domestic terrorism. In 2013, Dr. Alon Milwicki became a consultant and intelligence analyst for the U.S. Air Force. 2 years later, he received the Hate Studies Research Grant from Gonzaga University. His work was published in the Hate Studies Journal and presented at a conference and panels all over the nation on right-wing extremism in American history. In 2019, he had a major role at the inaugural Right Wing Studies Conference at Berkeley University and was a part of the steering committee for the conference on male supremacism. In addition to that, Dr. Milwicki is a professor of history, continues to research on neo-Nazism and white supremacy in the United States. He has worked for large organizations like MTV, CBS, the History Channel, and True TV. He also built up the marketing team for Elusive Films. He is a man of many titles and accomplishments. Joining me now for the interview is Dr. Alon Milwicki, professor of history and a research fellow at ACTRI, which focuses on American counterterrorism. Dr. Milwicki, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Anytime. Happy to be here.
So why did you decide to study neo-Nazism and white supremacy in American culture?
It was actually sort of just a chance that it ended up happening. You know, as you mentioned, becoming a professor wasn't my, or you know, an intel analyst wasn't my initial my goal for my career. I graduated college from Boston University in 2004 with the intent to work for MTV Networks because I'd spent 2 summers interning for them. I wanted to work in television production. And then on my last show, which was for the History Channel, which for all you people out there is not a source. Do not use the History Channel. No, just don't. History.com, no. Trust me. Insider info, no. Okay? Except Ancient Aliens. My wife would kill me if she knew I was this, Professor Crazy here. And I was working on a show that had to do about, prison gangs. And I got so fascinated by how the FBI, the State Department, the Justice Department, local and state police departments and prison guards, how they tracked and how they monitored, prison gangs. And particularly, I was having a whole lot of discussions about, white supremacy prison gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, et cetera, that I would spend hours on the phone with them after hours. And this is when I was living in New York. A prison guard in Connecticut turned to me and pretty much said, go back to school, get a master's degree in a research intensive discipline and figure out why this stuff still exists. Less than 3 months later, I was enrolled at Seton Hall University in New Jersey with the express purpose of studying white supremacy with specific focus on religious justification for white supremacy, and threw me down this like crazy rabbit hole. And I got so fascinated and, just by how these groups operate and how, more importantly, law enforcement deals with them and tracks them and monitors them, and other nonprofit organizations like Southern Poverty Law Center, Anti-Defamation League, et cetera, that I ended up going on for my doctorate. And throughout the course of that, I was still planned on being this intelligence analyst, that an opportunity came up for me to be trained and cleared by the Air Force. So I took it and then worked for them as a consultant. And then since that's pretty much like part-time sporadic work, I ended up taking a job as a history professor interim also. And then next thing you know, fell in love with teaching this stuff as well. But yeah, I've been studying, specifically what's called the Christian identity movement or theological justification for what I call Americanized Nazism for the better part of 12 years. All because of, the weird path I took, in my 20s. So my best advice to everyone is if you look back on your 20s and you think it went in a straight line, you've done something wrong.
On that point there, when you look at events like Charlottesville, mass shootings targeting the LGBTQ community, violence against minorities, and bombing abortion clinics, what role necessarily does religion play in right-wing extremism?
It can play quite a huge role. It can. There are when I look at white supremacy movements, right-wing white supremacy movements, right? And the reason why I say right-wing white supremacy movements is not because racism isn't across the spectrum. Racism is omnidirectional, okay?
Mhm.
But all white supremacy movements are right-wing, okay? That is like actual movements, be they the American Nazi Party or the religious racist right, be they, Odinists, the Satru, whatever. Religion can play a very big role in it because they have this there's a fundamentalist belief in like the literal translation of scripture, right? And
Mhm.
one of the both wonderful things and the biggest folly about religion is it's interpretive, right? No one group, no matter whether it's within Christianity, broadly Protestantism or Catholicism even, or within Judaism or within Islam, no one interpretation is correct, right? There is no one universal interpretation, but people who are fundamentalists to an extent believe that there is one literal interpretation of scripture. And if you go against that literal interpretation of scripture, you're going against God. And if you're going against God, then certain rules don't apply, like thou shalt not kill, literally supposedly etched in stone. But to be fair, we've been thou shalt killing in the name of God for millennia,
Mhm.
right? Like, I mean, just the Crusades pop to mind, right? Thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of people over time have been killed in the name of God, in defense of God and God's word.
Mhm.
So it can play a very huge role. And this is, again, my specialty is in white supremacy and right-wing extremism, mainly, Protestant Christianity, but it goes for every religion. Any religion that uses God to support violence, I mean, that's a perversion of what scripture is supposed to be, or at least how it should be. But then again, we have centuries, if not millennia, of history showing us that that's sort of a facet of history.
Why do white supremacists and neo-Nazis feel sort of like this sense of entitlement, like they are untouchable, and like certain things, even such as violence, is justified for them?
Well, there's a certain, it depends on who you're talking about, okay? Because, like I said, white supremacist is this broad umbrella term, and there are different, subgroups of it. And part of what my research does is try to delineate those subgroups, because, an American Nazi or a neo-Nazi wouldn't agree necessarily with a Klansman, wouldn't necessarily agree with, right? But speaking broadly, um, the basic premise is, like I said, violence in the name of God is justifiable. There is such a thing as righteous violence, right? Or at least in their mind, there is. So when it comes to the idea that they have this sort of entitlement, if you say let's say, a Christian Identist, one of the main religions for, neo-Nazis, they believe they are God's chosen. They believe they represent true Israel. They believe they are the inheritor of God's promise through Abraham. They believe that and they embody that. So that comes with it a sense of privilege. That comes with it a sense of entitlement, right? We have people like the Klan who will look at like American hyper-nationalism, right? Or they might also be, they can be Christian, they don't have to. They can be fundamentalist, they don't have to. But they'll also see, God's chosen the white race, They'll do all this Western Civ crap, like look how backwards all these other continents or whatever is, not having any actual understanding of Eastern culture or African culture or any of it, not actually knowing any of that stuff, or native culture. But the perception is because Western civilization is what's taught, what's here, what represents, quote unquote progress in their mind, that
Mhm.
they have come with them. Like it's like a package deal, this entitlement. Um, and there is, again, centuries of um, pseudo interpretive scripture and history that promotes whiteness, Europeanness, and later Americanness as, you know, the topmost of, I mean, even in this country alone, I mean, we had a eugenics movement in the 1920s that inspired the Nazis. You know, even Hitler himself said there's one country that's doing, and I'm paraphrasing, there's one country that's doing its best to, you know, serve the future of mankind and genetic future of mankind, and it's not Germany, it's America.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, sorry, the danger of asking a historian about his research. You might ask a specific question and I might trail off into other topics.
No, thank you for
My
that.
bad.
We appreciate historical perspective on this show. In the days after the 2020 presidential election, former President Trump and his allies began perpetuating these false claims of voter fraud in the election, and that the election was rigged. That ramped up. And you could almost feel a seismic shift in like Trump's world that something was about to happen. And then came the January 6th insurrection. What did you make of that at the time? Were you surprised by it?
No, unfortunately not. And I'm not surprised at the role groups like the Oath Keepers played in it, or Three Percenters. I mean, I don't know how many people know. I mean, it has been reported, but there were people. There was a guy with a shirt that said Camp Auschwitz. There was a couple people that had pins that said 6MWE, which stands for 6 million wasn't enough.
Mhm.
It, it wasn't surprising at all. Given the type of rhetoric that the former president was using, and the type of rhetoric that I know went on at rallies, you know, and given the type of heightened sort of what's the word I'm looking for? The sort of grievances that seem to be coming over, you know, a certain community, you know, well, really the white community in this country. And it's not just working class, because there's one thing Donald Trump does not represent, it's working class, right? But there was this sort of, there's been a boiling over, and like, this is something I intend to do some research on at some point. I would need another scholar to help me out on this, because 9/11 isn't my expertise, but there's a part of me that's convinced that 9/11 sort of sparked something in this country where partisanship or party became more important than country. We
Mm.
started to put, I mean, there was a seismic shift, and I don't think it happened in January 2020. I think it happened at 9/11, and it's not all that surprising, because this country has only been attacked twice, you know, Pearl Harbor and 9/11. And if you look at what we did in reaction to Pearl Harbor, we just rounded people who were like 1/8 Japanese or even remotely Oriental and threw them into you know, internment camps.
Mhm.
You know, and that was something the president did, and that's not even talking about what pop culture did. I mean, even Dr. Seuss got involved in anti-Japanese propaganda. And then if you look at what happened after 9/11, I mean, the same thing happened with anti-Arab and also anti-Semitism, because Jews and Arabs always get lumped together because Semitic people, right? And it's been boiling over, and I think you saw the beginning of that partisanship under Bush, and I think you saw it ramp up under Obama, and then it sort of boiled to a under Trump. Because what you saw, look, and not taking away from, I mean, look, the election of Barack Obama was a huge step forward for this country. Never mind what you think about his politics or whatever, but the fact that this country elected a black man president is a monumental step forward. There have been 3 non-white Protestant presidents, right? JFK didn't finish his term,
Mhm.
Barack Obama, and now we have Joe Biden.
Mhm.
Every other president has been a white Protestant male. All right. So the fact that it was Barack Obama was monumental, but it also, something else monumental happened, that I remember reading reports that white supremacy groups were going to come out in droves and vote, for Barack Obama, because they were so sure he would screw up the country that by 2012, the country would come around to their way of thinking. Well, it didn't happen in 2012, but you could make the argument that it sort of did in 2016, because what Trump did from the beginning is air out white grievances. He aired out the fact that, and you start seeing all of this. I mean, throughout Obama's presidency, and even before, throughout Bush's presidency, you start seeing all of this airing out of like, oh, that the terror of the fact that, you know, the Latin population is growing, or, you know, the idea that, more minorities are getting involved in business or being CEOs, or women are starting to campaign, or LGBTQ even becoming anything other than, even the fact that the label of LGBTQ plus became a thing and it wasn't just gay anymore, was like, oh, this is too much. All right. And now we see the same thing happening with transgender. Oh, this is too much. And it's just, or even worse with critical race theory. I mean, 90% of the people who complain about critical race theory have no effing idea what critical race theory is, nor the fact that it is not something that anybody, until you get to like at least a master's degree level, is even going to touch without actually. My favorite thing is like all of these people who are anti-critical race theory come out today supporting Dr. King, not realizing that Dr. King was a critical race theorist before it was like trendy. So, yeah. I don't even remember the original question. I just started going and went on. I'm sorry. I hope I answered some of it within that.
You did.
You're getting an insight into how some of my discussions in class go. Question starts and it just sort of goes.
In the past, when democracies have fallen or been under grave threat, we usually see tanks rolling down the streets, riots occurring, and the leaders forcefully seizing power in a coup. Their supporters will stand by them as this happens. In the United States, where that has never happened before, and so I guess my question is for that is in regard to January 6th, how do we as Americans understand the idea that we are just as susceptible to domestic terrorism as other countries are?
Well, see, that's the thing. The first things we have to recognize domestic terrorism, right? Because the first thing people think about domestic terrorism is they think of 9/11, right? That's the first thing they think about when they think of, or we've been conditioned in the past 20, 21 years, right, to think that domestic terrorism or any kind of terrorism is associated with Islam. And in this country, it's not. Multiple FBI directors have said that somewhere between 80 and 90% of all domestic terrorism in this country is done by white supremacists or far-right extremists. That has been well documented. Now, whether we believe that or not is a whole other thing, because if there's one thing that's true about America and maybe human beings as a whole, is that perception always matters more than reality, right? It's easier to take things at face value or to see difference. It's harder to sort of dig beneath the surface and recognize that the problem is endemic or systemic. And part of the reason I think we don't do that is because it's easier to point out somebody who is more likely to be, it's easy to target somebody who's more likely to be Muslim or a foreigner. I mean, I walk around my block and there's a kid with one of the colleges I teach at and has a 3%ers tag on his car, right? 3%ers are, a militia group, which white supremacy groups. I've seen them in parking lots at schools I teach at. I've seen them all over town, and it's supposedly a show of pride or nationalism. No, nationalism and patriotism aren't the same thing, right? Nationalism is the thing that leads us to war. Nationalism is the root cause of World War I. Patriotism is just love for your country. But the fact is, when you start saying there's only one way to be patriotic, there's only one way to do it, or you have to follow this rule, or you're not a patriot, which is things that, former president said, like, this is what patriotism is, and you don't follow that. That's not patriotism, that's nationalism. That's saying that there is one nation, there is one America. This is who makes up it. This is true America. There isn't 100% Americanism, and anyone who doesn't fall into that category is a potential threat. And that kind of language, that kind of rhetoric, that's straight out of the Second Klan, right? The whole America for Americans, even the whole America First thing. America First sounds great. Should America put its own interests first? I mean, yeah. Don't every other country put its interests first? Yeah. The problem is when, and the reason why there was such, I think, a heightened increase, or there has been such a heightened increase in white supremacy activity and support for white supremacists whether they're going on, like Oath Keepers going on Tucker Carlson, or, you know, uh, your Matt Gaetz's, your Marjorie Taylor Greene's, your space lasers and all whatever, is because like there was this slogan, America First, that everybody was like, yeah, this is right, we should put our interests first. But there was a whole other group of people that recognized that one of the first organizations to use this was the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. And that group rose to over somewhere between 4 and 6 million people in about 5 years. And they marched on Washington in 1925 with flags and things that said America First. So that means a whole lot of different things. And it was as a historian, I felt it was incredibly irresponsible not to understand that slogan had baggage and then not do anything to address that baggage. And by not addressing it, it was like almost condoning it, or at least it could be perceived as condoning it, if not embracing it, right? I get sidetracked, bro. I'm sorry.
So sorry. I'm gonna have to edit that awkward pause when I go back.
Nah, man, you do you.
It's okay. It's okay.
Professors are people too, man.
I know. Given that the January 6th attack is not being called domestic terrorism by many Republican officials, does that alarm you as an historian, as we're seeing lots of the events of that day already being whitewashed?
If there's one country that's good at whitewashing stuff, it's America. We've been doing that pretty well for a long time. And is it alarming? Yes. Is it surprising? No. I mean, it was only recently that that guy from the Oath Keepers was charged with sedition. If you looked at it before that, they were like, oh, they're going on about sedition. There's nothing about sedition. This was no sedition, and now it's sedition. And then you'll see they'll shift focus onto something else, saying, you'll get Tucker Carlson making Tucker face and go like, was it sedition? What is sedition? It's spelled with an S, right? Who decides what sedition is? If you just ask questions like that, it doesn't mean you're an intellectual. It just means you're in, I don't know if you're going to bleep out swear words, so I won't say it, but you know where I'm going with that. But, so there's, no, and this is something true. I do believe America is one of the most progressive countries on the planet. And I don't mean that in terms of political party. I mean that in terms of moving forward, right? And this is why, on some level, I took issue with Make America Great Again, even though he took it from Ronald Reagan that said, let's make America great again, which is, never mind, plagiarism, failed the course, but anyway. The reason I take issue with it is because I think America is a great country, and it always was a great country, and it will always be a great country for one simple reason. When we take steps forward, we cement them in iron. Okay, we actually can take those steps forward. There are a lot of other countries where you can't look at your past honestly, at least at a collegiate level. I know we don't do it at a high school level, right? There's a lot of undoing I have to end up doing when I teach survey courses. But at a collegiate level, we can honestly look at the past and be like, yeah, we screwed up. Here's what happened. Here's why people thought it was okay. And here's why it wasn't. And we actually have the opportunity in this country to learn from our past and move forward. There are a lot of other countries where you just can't do that. A lot of other well-developed countries where you can't do that, right? And when we make a step forward, whether it's, Brown v. Board of Education, whether it's, like even Roe v. Wade, which is being chipped to hell, it's being chipped to hell. It's not being undone. We will try like crazy to undo it, right? Because we take that step forward and then we take like 100 after it and we get all excited. And then what happens is reality sets in, and that system that we've had in place forever that we refuse to change doesn't catch up to us, that we run all the way back, but we realize we can't take 100 steps back. We can only take 99. So that one step forward, whether it's like the Reconstruction Amendments, whether it's women getting the right to vote, whether it's gay marriage, whatever it is, that cement step forward is there. It's there. And like I said, we'll try to trip away at it, but we can't actually undo it.
Mm.
We'll try, but we can't. So that to me makes America fundamentally a great country. That doesn't mean we are not without problems. I think when it comes to things like when you're talking about, like you were saying before about like tanks in the streets and whatnot, and why the armed insurrection, and it was armed, at the Capitol is so like, oh, it can't happen here. That's the exact same mentality we had at Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
That's the exact same mentality. Oh, they can't attack us. Oh, they wouldn't attack us. Who would attack us? It's the exact same mentality we had with 9/11. And there's this sort of if you think about in terms of Western countries, there's still a naivete to America. All these other countries, whether they're, France or England or Italy or whatever, they've been around for centuries, millennia. America is kind of still the new kid on the block, right? And we grew up really fast, right? Especially once the 20th century hit. Like we went from being like, the strong other side of the world kind of dude to like in charge in a very short period of time. So I think on one level, there's sort of still some like predictable growing pains we're going through, but then at the same time, because America has this and has always been a country of many, right? There is no one singular American. There is no one identity that makes up what America is, because we are multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-religious, multi-everything. All right. Which again is, I think, the source of our strength. Because of that, there will always be a demographic in this country that tries to always bring back some sort of idea that, no, this is America and you others should be grateful for being here, because without us, whoever that us is, be they the Klan, be they, American Nazis, etc., whatever, they'll put this whole idea of we are the ones, either chosen by history, by God, by whatever, who represent the greatness of this country. The rest of you should be quote unquote grateful for being here. And that sort of identity is obviously inherently problematic, because it's confrontational at best, or at worst, or I don't know which way that makes sense. At least of all, it's confrontational. Worst of all, you see what happens at the Capitol.
Mm-hmm. In relation to the leader of the Oath Keepers, this paramilitary group that was arrested in Texas, along with members of that organization being charged with seditious conspiracy. In the intro, I sort of laid out the Fort Smith trial and the ultimate acquittal there. Prosecutors could not get a conviction on those sedition charges. Why is sedition such a hard thing to prove? And do you think that now a jury looking at this will be more willing to convict after we just had an armed insurrection?
I think they'll be more willing to. I think sedition is hard to understand because it hasn't really happened here. I think there's, again, it's part of that exceptionalism where there's the idea that America is supposed to be above that kind of idea, or that kind of that level of, for lack of a better word, like depravity and, hatred. We're supposed to be better than that. Will it stick? Will they get it? I mean, I have to believe that the FBI and they did their work well. I have faith in the FBI and and what they do and what they found. Obviously, we're not privy to all the information, but I have to believe that if they were able to file a sedition charge, they must have some pretty solid information. And we can only wait and see as it comes out. And we have to actually see what comes out. We can't just hear it be politicized, on TV. And we have to actually, it's incumbent on us as American citizens, as scholars, to actually read between the lines, to look at what, we only have we have a lot of ways to get information, right? But there's only a few of them that are verifiable. And it's up to us to actually verify what we're hearing, what we're reading, is actually true. And we have to do the research ourselves and not simply just be like, oh, I heard it on X, Y, and Z news channel, or someone posted it on Twitter, or this pundit said this, or this guy said that. We actually have to do the diligence and actually pay attention to the trial, listen to what comes out of it, and then make the decision for ourselves. That's incumbent on us as Americans. And that's part of what I would argue is, part of the gift of being American, again, going into the thing that makes us being great, because we have the opportunity to be privy to that information, but it's also our responsibility, and it's kind of a heavy one, right? Not to simply rely on not reputable sources just because it's easier, if that makes sense.
Today, there was reporting by NBC News on federal lawsuits targeting January 6th insurrection groups' finances. That is a common theme we've seen in history that has proven to be effective in disbanding these racist organizations. Can you explain the logic behind that?
Oh, if they don't have, it's money is the root of everything. If they don't have any money, they can't do anything, right? Like one of the major things any of these groups always do is propagandize, right? They want to join, they need membership. And the reason they need membership is because membership is not just numbers, but it's also money. They can't, these people need to, the people who run the organizations and are part of the organizations need a living also. So they need to actually, if you can cut off the funds, they can't, pay for their web address. They can't, get any of their equipment or to do any of their propagandizing. They can't travel. They can't produce their leaflets. They can't do any of that stuff. It's definitely effective. I mean, it's effective for anything. I mean, if you can get after the money, I mean, it's even the same tactics they used against the mafia, right? It's, any kind of terrorist organization, if you can cut off their funds and you can effectively cut off their funds, I mean, yeah, they're done. If you think about it, if you think about it as like a business, right? The business, say a business that's producing evil things, right? Like, I don't know, pick any corporation. I'm sure they've done something, right? If you cut off their revenue stream, they're not gonna be able to produce goods, right? That's the same thing is true of any, I think, terrorist organization. If you cut off their revenue stream, then they're going to need to be supported, and they're going to need to have a wide enough support net, a wide enough safety net of followers. And look, it could happen. I mean, there were wealthy people involved, in the 1950s and 60s in the movement that I study. There were wealthy people involved who were funding this stuff. There were wealthy people in the Aryan nations. They're wealthy, and they'll take donations from them, and but if you can somehow manage to cut off their money, then yeah, that's like the kill shot. Because the thing of it is like, you can't, if you combat them ideologically or theologically, it's hard, right? And I don't mean hard in the sense of just like difficult, to actually bring any legal action against them, but especially if it's a religiously run organization, how do you tell them that their interpretation of scripture is wrong? How do you disprove faith? The answer is you can't. If somebody has a warped interpretation of history and their comeback to you is saying, well, that's because all of the history books you've read have been tainted by whatever, the popular favorite is the Jewish media, right? If whatever the history books have been tainted, or even the Bible has been tainted by Jewish media or rabbis or whatever, then you also are tainted. We, whoever the white supremacist is, not me, you know what I'm saying, knows and understands the true history, knows and understands what's really happened. It's like the whole thing with the election. Those people know that it was stolen. There have been how many 60, 65 court cases that have proven it's not?
Yeah.
And that the majority of the fraud that was actually seen, if I remember right, was actually on the Republican side, right? It doesn't matter. Evidence doesn't matter to them. Perception matters more than reality. They have this imprint that everything else, every other piece of evidence, everything, whether it's, these are the guys who will go Blue Lives Matter till they're blue in the face, But when they tell you the FBI has conducted this interview, they'll be like, well, the FBI is tainted.
Mhm.
Or when they go to the insurrection, they are yelling at the Capitol Police for shooting, in self-defense, one of the insurrectionists. Or the fact that they're cheering on these people who are beating the crap out of cops, but they'll tell you that they're so pro-police. And logically, that doesn't follow. That doesn't make any logical sense, right? How can you be pro-police but supporting people beating police? Well, it's because those police were the wrong ones. Those police aren't the police. Those police are the police that were, that bought the big lie of Joe Biden winning. Those police were tainted, though, whatever. So it's impossible to get at them through any kind of logic or reason, for that matter. And then what point do you get in disassociating them from these organizations? You don't. But if you can hit them with money, again, long-winded answer to a short answer that should have been, yeah, money is the best way to go after terrorist organizations.
When you look at school board meetings now and lots of things that are happening around education, and sort of like we're seeing like this large anti-vaccine movement, and that being met with violence and threats against school officials and others. Where exactly does that fall on the line of your thinking? How exactly are you looking at this?
At the anti-vax people?
Mhm.
I see that as a problem with the internet more than anything else, and social media, because as much as the world has become more interconnected, which is wonderful, as great a tool as the internet is, it's also the biggest source of dis, and whatever kind of other information you want. I mean, you could find information that supports anything on the internet, right? And everybody is an expert on everything. We're seeing sort of the erosion of expertise right now, or at least an attempt at the erosion of expertise. And I think it's because, in all honesty, because everything has become so hyper partisan. Again, going back to my thing about post 9/11, I think that everything became more about party over country. I think it would have been, you have Trump himself coming out saying, take the vaccine. I mean, he colors it with fun words like, oh, it should be everyone's choice, but he's saying, oh, take the vaccine, but it's mostly because he wants credit for it,
Mhm.
right? But at the same time, when you see, like, if everybody was so angry at Dr. Fauci, like if they're so angry at him now, why weren't they angry when he was doing news reports about AIDS or any other, like why, I mean, I don't remember, granted, I was about your age when, the AIDS epidemic was really going nuts in the late 80s and into the 90s. But at the same time, I don't remember anybody going completely crazy. I know it used to be called GRID, and they used to think it was gay-related immunodeficiency. They used to think it was only gay people who could get it.
Mhm.
And then I'm sure they also went to minorities thinking only minorities got it. And then it was like, but I mean, if you probably go back and watch Dr. Fauci, he's probably giving all the exact same speeches and the exact same sort of caution, but because we fast became party over country, because he dared to disagree with, the party in charge, he got smeared. And because he got smeared, and because the federal government didn't step up to say, like, no, this is not about that, this is about keeping people alive, then it's sort of deteriorated, I think, into this whole, what's hilarious is you see people like Ted Cruz and his infinite stupidity. I'm sorry, I have nothing nice to say about Ted Cruz, saying things like my body, my choice for vaccines. And you're like, I'm sorry, are you really using that phrase, my body, my choice for vaccines? I mean, are you really using that? And you don't see the horrific, I don't even know if it's irony or if it's just flat out
Mhm.
stupidity and and everyone's like, oh, there's never been mandates before. Freaking Washington had like a vaccine mandate, right? So I mean, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like, chill out, dude. but I do think it would probably energize certain pockets of the group I study, because they'll think it's federal overreach, and they've become very anti-government. They think the government is a lot of them think the government has been corrupted by undesirables. A lot of them throw back to to Jews as being the every time they talk about deep state, they might think that they're talking about this shadow government, whatever. But the deep state has its roots in the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is plagiarized by Henry Ford, in the International Jew, the world's foremost enemy, which is then plagiarized by Adolf Hitler, right? Which is then plagiarized throughout the 20th century and it's today. So the whole idea that there's this deep state shadow government is, coded language for, Jews being the puppet masters and controlling everything. And, oh my God, there's Jews who are doctors, there's Jews who are in government, there's Jews. I mean, look, as far as white supremacists are concerned, I'm their worst nightmare. I mean, I wasn't born in this country. I was born in South Africa. I'm Jewish. I worked in entertainment. I worked for the government, and now I'm an academic. I've like ticked off all their boxes. Like I am like literally their envisionment, and I look white. So, well, also I have long hair, so I'm even worse. So, so I'm like literally their Terminator, and that's the sort of perception that sort of rallies around that. All of these industries have been co-opted. You can't trust them at all because they've been co-opted, corrupted by undesirables such as myself.
Hmm. Given the political status of our nation, with many Republicans justifying the January 6th insurrection, is the threat of domestic terrorism or another political coup in the future, is that still present?
Domestic terrorism, yes. Coup, I really want to say no.
Hmm.
I think domestic terrorism isn't going to go anywhere. I mean, we've seen a steady increase in domestic terrorism in the past 20 years. We've seen a steady rise in hate crimes. I know there's also been a steady rise in anti-Semitic attacks. We've seen a consistent effort to disenfranchise minority communities specifically, which is going on like literally, I'd like to say right under our noses, but hopefully we're paying attention. And sucks to say it, but it's really your age demographic and up until the mid to late 20s that are the ones who are going to have to show up in force. You guys are the ones who have the most to lose to let the people over 70 make decisions for your future.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what sort of happens because almost the lowest voter turnout is always between the ages of like 18 to 30. I even know other professors who actually give extra credit to students who vote, which I think is very sad. Because it's you guys who have the investment in the future. And if you look at things like, and I know I'm totally getting off topic from your question here, but it's just in my head, so I'm going to run with it. But if you look at things that, like it is, Martin Luther King Day, and you look at organizations that existed at the time that were probably one of the most powerful organizations to ever combat civil rights was SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they were kids, young kids. Whether it's the lunch counter protests or the sit-ins or any of that stuff, they were kids. Those are the ones who made the change. Those are the ones who got the stuff passed, right? Sure, the older guys made the great speeches, but it was the kids who actually, made the difference. And if you really want to see social change, and this might show my bias as a social historian, but I believe that real change in this country happens first at the grassroots level. It's not about getting an act signed. It's not about, making a memorial. It's not about, giving someone a day or something. It's not about that, right? Sure, that's looks good, right? But it's almost like that's almost like a token, right? It looks good and people can rally around it, but nothing actually really changes. In order for change to actually happen, it's my fervent belief it has to be from the bottom up. And those are the kids who did that with SNCC. Those are the ones who did that. And it's going to take, and we see some notions of that happening, you know, especially in the last couple of years. I mean, yeah, the pandemic got in the way of it, but you know, I think it's called the civil rights movement because it's ongoing. It didn't stop when Dr. King got shot. It didn't stop. It's something that continues onward, and it should continue onward because it should be a constant struggle.
Mhm.
And as for what you originally asked, I have totally brain farted. So if you want to ask that again, and I can go back to that, I apologize.
It was in relation to the future threat of domestic
Ah,
terrorism.
yes, I think um, I think the problem of domestic terrorism will, I mean, will. All right. I can't speak mostly. Like I know if we look at what just happened the last, here in Texas, it's
Mhm.
in Colleyville. Um, that's a type of domestic terrorism that exists and is horrible. It's not what I study, so I can't really speak to that. Do I think that's going to go away? No. Um, I don't think that anything we've done in the Middle East over the past, I don't know, nearly century is help the matters at all. I don't think um, uh, that type of extremism is going to go away. I think that's still going to be a thing. But my expertise is on white supremacy, so I can talk to that more. I'm not discounting or dismissing that by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not my expertise, and I don't want to speak to something I'm not knowledgeable about, or as knowledgeable, or whatever. Um, the thing about white supremacy movements is that, like I said, real change has to happen at the bottom. Um, there is, or has been, for since America's inception and even before, a systematic oppression of the other. There has been within, I hope, a shrinking community, a finite definition, as I said, about who gets to be American. Um, there is still a predominant sense that to be white, to be male, to be Protestant is advantageous in this country. Everything else is somewhat varying levels of beneath, but still beneath. And in order for that mentality to change, there has to be, systemic change. There has to be like real, honest change in every, like radical change at every level of government and society. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and will cost a lot of money. And a lot of people are reticent to do that because of all those reasons I just listed. But in order for domestic terrorism, white supremacy movements to really take a nosedive, that needs to happen. And there are some things that are hopeful signs of change. Like even in the last 20 years, the idea of mental health, right? Like mental health, like when I was your age, if I told someone I was seeing a therapist, I would, you know, been called a
Mhm.
wuss or a sissy or whatever. Now it's normal,
Yeah.
you know, it's normal. And that's wonderful. We actually recognize that mental health is an actual thing, and that we actually recognize that um, there are situations that are preventable. There are organizations that exist that help people to de-radicalize, that see people uh, in these situations and help them disassociate from these groups for whatever reason they may have been involved in them in the first place, right? And a lot of it has to do with being able to see, there's a lot of former extremists that work with, uh, you know, um, police officers, law enforcement, Homeland Security, and all these groups that actually do the work, do the legwork, do the groundwork to try to help these people see, okay, look, this is why you're in this situation. Let's see if we can bring you out of it, and then we can talk. Um, and so I'm hopeful, but I think something radical or systematic has to happen first. I don't know what that thing is. But I'm hopeful that look, again, going back to what I said about this country, the thing about white supremacy in this country is it's a constant. It's a constant. It's always there. It's just a question of what level it's at within society. Right now, we're sort of up high. There are periods where it sort of dips below the surface and there is real progress. And you could argue that there was real progress made. There's definite points, decades you can point to as like there's real progress, real progress, real progress. But there still is that sort of undercurrent that's constantly there. And the reason is because that system, like I said, that system is in place that supports a certain demographic more than any other. But with how diverse America is becoming, with how much more diverse we're becoming, with how much more accepting we're becoming, or at least not, I guess accepting is the wrong word, or knowledgeable of the discrimination that exists. And the idea of allyship for whatever demographic that is struggling exists, I'm cautiously hopeful, but realistic, and I'm probably cautiously hopeful because I have 2 young girls. But, and it would be painful to just be completely pessimistic, but realistically, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not. It's just not. And I'm sorry for being so dour, but it's just not.
Once again, my guest is Dr. Alon Milwicki. He is a...
Oh, that's such a sad note to end on. That's not cool. That's not cool.
Would you like me to end on a hopeful note?
Oh, come on, man.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. That's such a sad note. But I mean, it's the truth. I mean, realistically, look, the thing about racism, and this is my own definition of racism, and this is, I'll leave with this. This is my own definition of racism. Racism to me is omnidirectional. Racism, you think about it as like this big, just this toddler sitting up on a cloud. It doesn't care who plays with it. It doesn't care which direction it's played with. It just wants to be played with, right? When you other somebody, when you say because you are X, Y, and Z is true, that's racism. Racism has no logic behind it. I mean, what was it? Like biologically, we are like 99.8 or 9% identical to each other, but for a few phenotypes, like we're all literally identical. I think we have like 90% in common with bananas. Okay.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Okay. And I don't see anyone going out and just smashing bananas just because. Okay? All right. So when you say because you are X, Y, and Z is true, you are in effect racializing the other. And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be something that we traditionally consider a race. If you say because you are gay, Y and Z is true. If you are trans, Y and Z is true. If you are Jewish, Y and Z is true. What you as the individual are doing is essentially turning that group into a race of people. You are assigning them characteristics. You are saying this is who you are because of some whatever thing that's completely irrelevant, right? That has nothing to do that you're inferior or you're less than or you're dangerous or you're whatever. And because racism has no foundation in logic and has all foundation in emotion, it's easy. It's easy. But I think because of the strides we've been making in mental health, because of these groups that have been working to disassociate former extremists, because of work like the Southern Poverty Law Center, because of the fact that the FBI and the Justice Department are starting to really dig into domestic terrorism and white supremacy movements, I think there really is a solid chance for something progressive to happen. Whether it will or won't is up to the future, is up to your generation, is up to the people who have more investment in the future than old farts like me. Even though I'm not even 40.
Once again, my guest is Dr. Alon Milwicki. He is a professor and adjacent professor of history at Texas.
Adjunct. Come on, brother.
Adjunct professor of history.
Reading. For God's sakes, read, people. Sorry.
Dr. Milwicki, thank you so much for coming on the show.
No problem.